The title of this presentation and my thesis research is Mending the Gap, Latino Involvement with Mainstream and Local Environmental Organizations, a pilot study in Los Angeles County, California. The research question and real purpose of this study was to construct a more thorough understanding of Latino relationships with environment as well as local and mainstream environmentally focused organizations in the Los Angeles area. More generally, the purpose of this research was to try to develop a theory of Latino environmental consciousness and action. And the goal of this research was to identify appropriate ways to explore and initiate conversations with local Latino groups and individuals or locally operating mainstream organizations in order to pursue mutually beneficial cooperation and expand the environmental movement in the U.S. While the environmental movement is defined by a conglomerate of entities, the face of the modern environmental movement is really that of mainstream environmental organizations. Those that are nationally reaching, have been around for a number of years, have established reputation. And these organizations tend to focus on the preservation of wilderness or non-human nature. To the extent that humans are included in the missions of a lot of these organizations, it's in the role of protecting or being stewards of nature, not explicitly a part of it. And there are a number of limitations to these organizations as the face of the modern movement and this approach. And that there is an overwhelming feeling that these organizations are just preaching to the choir, that those individuals for whom this message would draw them in are already involved, and there is a real difficulty in gaining support from other diverse groups of individuals. These supporters are largely middle-aged, middle-class, and white as well. And there is a growing consensus among mainstream organizations and others in the movement that without diversification of the support base, they are likely to lose relevance and influence in the future. About 37% of the U.S. population is identified as an ethnic or racial minority, although there is still underrepresentation of minorities in mainstream environmental organizations. In terms of Latinos are the fastest growing demographic in the United States. And in California specifically, approximately 39% of the population does identify as Latino and approximately 39% of the population as white. And this percentage for Latinos is expected to grow to 48% by the year 2060. There have been a couple theories presented regarding minority involvement with the environmental movement, specifically environmental organizations. One, stating that minorities are not interested or concerned about environmental issues, and two, that when concern does exist, there are societal barriers that exist as well to keep minorities from participating. Though these theories are incomplete regarding Latino involvement with environmental issues in the environmental movement, in that Latinos are concerned with environmental issues and are actively involved with urban environmental issues, as well as some mainstream organizations. A number of polls and some academic journal articles, as well as journalism pieces, have begun to indicate that the specific area of concern for many urban Latinos in terms of environmental concern is different than that of many mainstream national environmental organizations, in that mainstream organizations tend to focus on nature as wilderness or separate from human civilization, and urban Latinos tend to focus on issues that are more immediate or more personal, those that would be defined often as environmental justice type issues, issues of pollution, toxins, and their effects on human health, access to open spaces and green spaces, and equal participation in environmental decision making. Moreover, Latino environmental groups that have begun to pop up across the U.S. tend to focus on environmental justice issues. A small amount of past research has been done beginning to look at Latino relationships with the environmental movement, environmental organizations, although these have been on a relatively small scale, often focusing only on individual organizations, mainstream organizations at that, or come from individual insights from informal interviews, which presents the gap, the large gap in knowledge. Because this research has been small, the investigations have only focused on one specific organization, and it does not investigate motivations of Latinos who are involved with mainstream organizations, and similarly doesn't investigate areas of collaboration or potentially expanding the environmental movement. So in terms of the current research, the data collection and analysis was really governed by the theory of reasoned action, which states that behaviors are best predicted by intentions, and that intentions are expressed through attitudes about a behavior, which are based on beliefs about a behavior, perceived injunctive and descriptive norms about a behavior, that is, what an individual thinks those people close to him or her believe is the right way to act regarding a behavior, as well as what people close to him or her are actually doing regarding a behavior, and based on perceived control about a behavior and how much control an individual feels that they have over and with that specific behavior. The methods used in this research were qualitative interviews and a couple instances of non-participant observation. And interviews were chosen for this research because of its exploratory nature, and I really wanted to capture the complexities of the decision-making processes and motivations for the interviewees involved in the research. The questions in the interview were broken into 4 thematic areas: beliefs about environment, involvement with environmental organizations or efforts, collaboration with other organizations, and personal and community, which involves demographic questions. Moreover, the interview questions were crafted to target those 4 domains of the reasoned action theory, in that interviewees who were predominantly involved with the local organization were asked questions about their attitudes, perceived norms, and perceived control regarding their participation with their local organization, as well as with mainstream organizations. And interviewees predominantly involved with the mainstream organization were asked about their attitudes, norms, and perceived control of participation with their mainstream organization and local organizations. The participants in the study were 22 individuals, 11 men and 11 women, who self-identified as Latino or Latina. There were 11 individuals predominantly involved in local organizations and 11 predominantly involved in a mainstream organization, coming from a total of 4 mainstream organizations and 7 local organizations in Los Angeles County. Data collection was done via one-on-one voice recorded interviews after informed consent. The majority of these interviews were done in person, although some were done over the phone. Analysis of the interviews were done using a constant comparison method to develop and interpret themes within and between interviewee responses. And analysis was done through a coding of themes on 4 different levels. The first round of coding involved searching for themes within individual interviews. The second round was a comparison of themes between interviewee responses to reasoned action domain questions. The third round involved searching for themes among demographic qualities of interviewees. And the 4th round was a comparison between interviews from interviewees predominantly involved with mainstream organizations versus local organizations. And then these 4 levels were layered to construct a more encompassing group of themes for the entire research. The insights gained from this analysis, as well as some of the insights directly from individual interviews, contributed to the construction of a final report that was sent to all participants in the research in their corresponding organizations. And this report really contained the suggestions regarding appropriate ways to initiate conversation and explore collaboration with Latinos and Latino groups and mainstream organizations in order to pursue that mutually beneficial cooperation. There were a number of interesting results that came from this research, although for the interest of time, I'm just going to touch on some of the really big ones that I felt emerged. Regarding beliefs about environment, one of the most striking results was the almost unanimous definition of environment as surroundings by interviewees and not explicitly nature. The majority of interviewees also noted the issues of highest concern being those that were environmental justice type concerns: air, water, land pollution, use, and misuse. And those were issues that affect both humans and non-humans. And finally, regarding use of the term environmentalism, the majority of criticism regarding the term environmentalism actually came from interviewees who were predominantly involved with mainstream organizations, those organizations that often tend to utilize and promote use of the word. Whereas interviewees who were predominantly involved with local organizations tended to embrace the word much more readily because they were referencing their own definitions of environment and constructing their own definition of environmentalism over those involved with mainstream organizations who tended to reference an already sort of established definition of what environmentalism entailed. A number of interviewees also recognized negative connotations surrounding the word environmentalism and noted that while they did not use or identify with the word, they did believe that their actions might fall under the category of what they defined as environmentalism. Specifically regarding negative connotations, one interviewee who was involved predominantly with a mainstream organization noted that when speaking with other Spanish-speaking individuals and community members, she used the word ecologista, which means one, essentially, who cares about the ecologies, over use of the word ambientalista, which is a more literal translation of environmentalist, because of the negative connotations that carried over even into the Spanish language. In terms of attitudes about participation with their organization, interviewees' attitudes about the participation and motivation for becoming involved with their organization overwhelmingly aligned with their beliefs about environment as surroundings, and that environmental justice type issues were those issues of highest concern. Those that did express there was a nature emphasis in their motivation for becoming involved with their respective organization were also those for whom nature was described as being a part of their surroundings growing up. In terms of the environmental justice issue focus, interviewees tended to either be involved in an organization that focused on those types of issues, or were trying to promote environmental justice work in a non-environmental justice organization, as one interviewee described, pushing the bounds of environment. Regarding collaboration, a number of individuals noted a sense of being a part of a culture of activism in their involvement with their specific organization, as extending that part of that culture of activism, really recognizing that their work and their activism included issues of environmental, social, labor, immigration, and economics, all combined. Another indication for the prospect of successful collaboration among groups was that a number of the challenges noted by individuals predominantly involved in mainstream organizations seem to align with many of the reasons that local organizations were touted as being successful, and vice versa, in that many mainstream organizations had lots of resources or access to people and manpower. They had a difficult time tapping into new communities and new diverse communities and diversifying and gaining broader support, whereas these were things that many interviewees predominantly involved with local organizations noted were real strong points and points of success for those local organizations. And similarly, while local organizations were very good at engaging their local community, they often lacked resources, access to resources, and manpower that mainstream organizations tend to have much more available. Overall, there was a very favorable view of collaboration in general, and there was a mostly open opinion of interviewees to working with organizations of the opposite characterization, so local organizations working with mainstream organizations, and the other way around. Some interviewees did note some concerns. One interviewee involved predominantly the mainstream organization noted that sometimes it would be counterproductive to collaborate with local organizations if the mission and focuses were too different. And some interviewees involved in local organizations noted that caution should be had when approaching collaboration with mainstream organizations to avoid co-opting or mainstream organizations not following the model or mission of local organizations and not really being an equal partnership. Although it was not a question that I asked in the interview, a number of interviewees who were predominantly involved with a local organization noted that while collaboration with mainstream organizations would be beneficial, that collaboration with other local organizations would be more beneficial, and they attributed this to local organizations as being more accessible to communities in that they involved more flexibility to adapt their approaches to the specific nuanced characteristics of different communities, that they had more opportunities to involve community members in the on-the-ground decision-making processes, and they're involved a higher utilization of Spanish language, specifically spoken Spanish. Regarding norms surrounding participation, interviewees did not seem to be influenced by people close to them regarding their motivation to become involved with environmental work and organizations. The majority of interviewees claimed that they cared more or were more knowledgeable about environmental issues than their friends or family or the people they considered close to them, and all interviewees believed that they were more active and more involved with the issues of environmental concerns than their friends and family. Additionally, interviewees believed that they actually influenced their friends and family through their work to become more educated and more aware and more involved in some environmental issues. In terms of perceived control from participation with their appropriate organizations, interviewees identified best ways to help with the environmental issues tended to align with their own work with their specific organizations, indicating that there was a great sense of control or self-efficacy or ability to really target some of those main issues that people thought needed to be targeted through the work that they were doing with their specific organization. There were a few exceptions to this, and they also contain the similarity of lacking control through their organization. A couple individuals from a local organization noted that while they thought their organization did a great job at addressing some of the more social issues of its mission, that it lacked an inability to really effectively address some of the environmental issues, and that they similarly felt an inability to address some of the environmental issues that they wanted to through their organization's main focus on social issues. One individual who had been employed with two mainstream organizations also noted that she felt a sense of disempowerment through those organizations' inability or unwillingness to be flexible in their model and approach in terms of different communities that they were working with, and feeling a sense of lacking effectiveness due to that organization's singular focus. In all three of these instances, the individuals felt a sense of less control and less ability to contribute to addressing some environmental issues of concern because of their organization's siloed focus. So overall, a couple of main themes really emerged from the research analysis, and those were that environmental work should be holistic and that humans are a part of nature. So from analysis of these interviews, as well as direct contributions from individual interviews, a list of suggestions were compiled that are included in both the thesis and the final report given to research participants. And these were suggestions regarding appropriate ways to initiate conversations and involvement. These suggestions are not listed in whole here, but I did want to just go through and briefly note what those suggestions were. So, address issues holistically. Focus on the community as a whole. Provide opportunities for youth to get involved with non-built environment as well as environmental issues. Seek opportunities to work locally. Make environment personal. Be cautious of sounding preachy. Emphasize and foster community empowerment. Provide ways to actively get involved beyond signing petitions and donating money. Offer tiered ways to get involved, so individuals who are more experienced and more knowledgeable can be involved in the same projects or campaigns as their newly involved or less informed friends and family. Engage people in personal change and larger campaigns, so they may feel that sense of empowerment and accomplishment and have an outlet to expand upon that through larger campaign issues and really build that involvement. Build relationships with other groups, specifically before something is needed from those other groups, by recognizing that all groups are really working towards a similar goal of community health, and that those relationships should be developed and networked before something is actually needed from a different organization. Collaborate on issues. Don't seek lasting partnerships, and that some organizations or individuals may be deterred by the idea that they will have to agree with everything an organization does in the future in order to collaborate on this one issue if they engage in a partnership. Adapt elements of an organization's mission to fit the unique demographics of specific areas. And finally, be careful with the word environmentalism and perhaps not use it unless it has been already used in a positive manner and identified with the individual or individuals with which you're working. Because of the scale of the current research and the limitations of that research, it does leave room for a lot of future research to expand upon some of the ideas. And that future research should be larger studies, including more people and more organizations, as well as conversations with individuals who are not only involved in environmentally focused organizations, but also non-environmentally focused community organizations, the lay public who are not involved in environmentally focused or non-environmentally focused community organizations, as well as college students who are involved in environmental clubs or disciplines. Similarly, it can be very interesting to speak with youth about their relationships and perceptions of environment and environmental organizations, as the current research only focused on adults 18 years of age or older. Future research should also look at multiple urban settings across the U.S. As the current research only focused on Los Angeles County, it would be interesting to do similar research in a number of different metropolitan areas across the United States. Additionally, research in the future should look at Latino populations and relationships with environment and environmental organizations in rural areas in the U.S., as these may be different from those of urban Latinos because of the different geographic and social constraints involved in rural settings. In the same way that it is inappropriate to assume that the analysis and research from the results from this research should be applied to other urban and rural populations of Latinos, it's also inappropriate to assume that these findings and these relationships can be generalized to other minority populations in the U.S., and future research should look at similarly relationships with environment of other minorities. And finally, future research would also be good to look at the different means of communication and the effects and potential roles, specifically of non-English language and social media in terms of expanding the environmental movement into a more holistic and representative movement in the U.S. And with that, I welcome any questions.